kind of just to finish my thoughts on the new season of Bojack Horseman, I just finished episode 12, and I have to say that as a whole, I did enjoy the season. As much as I may have some qualms, I did think it was a positive experience for me. I find it hard to really assess the season with regards to my experience of the last few seasons because, again, whenever you watch something, it's inevitable that your experience of it will be influenced by your state of mind, by when you're watching it, where you're watching it. When I watched season 4 of Bojack Horseman, I was still in university, for example, and I remember seeing it in my dorm. It was my last school year of sorts, and I was watching the new season, and I remember being so blown away by season 4, especially Time's Arrow, the episode, which was the 11th episode. Usually, the 11th episode of the BoJack Horseman's where all the punches are thrown, and that's usually what the culmination of it. In a very similar way to Game of Thrones, where it has second to the last episode has like the big stuff. I have that as my last kind of lingering memory of BoJack Horseman, and I am slightly disappointed, not necessarily disappointed. I'm very happy that I was able to get that from last season, but this season is more subdued, more laid back. The main thrust of the season is comes from BoJack's new show, and it's kind of his reclamation of his name to some degree because the show becomes successful. The show does well. It actually becomes well. It's very funny because they have Rami Malek playing this character who is the director of this prestige drama. I get this kind of like how he's on Mr. Robot, and it's very it's not very similar plot wise, but it's very similar. It's kind of, I think it's lampooning the idea of this prestige drama where, as convoluted as things may become, it's always still kind of praised. If you don't understand it, it means it's good. So they kind of poke lots of fun on that whole concept of sorts, and that's the kind of backbone of the season, though it kind of grounds all the arcs are kind of go around that kind of structure. And I feel like to some degree, I feel like we kind of have seen that already with when BoJack shot the movie, to some degree, not necessarily the same way, but here we have a lot of the big issues I think that come up in the season are not from the season itself. So the big, real kind of emotional issues come from BoJack dealing with past issues, maybe throughout the last few seasons, maybe about his mother. We get a little bit about the death of his mother. We get some stuff about Charlotte. The whole Charlotte incident is like a big kind of part of the season. So I feel like this season, it's kind of very apt that it ends with him going to rehab, because the whole season was structured around him trying to deal with his past and just showing how unable he is to really deal with it on his own, especially when his confidant, his best friend of sorts in Diane, is having trouble on her own with her own divorce with Mr. Peanut Butter. So he realizes at the end, he needs help. He gets into drugs again. This time it's like he gets into some kind of pain relief medication. I think it's opioids is what they may have said in the show. And he gets into some problems because of his drug use. Episode 11, in the very kind of similar way, it reminded me of the first season. So episode 11, I think the trip episode, where it kind of follows a very similar structure, but here we get a parallelism with his TV show and his real life, and he kind of gets drawn into feeling like what's happening in his show is actually him in real life. He becomes a detective of sorts, and that is kind of what the whole episode is kind of structured. It goes in and out of shooting the TV show and him going out and doing his real stuff and being a real detective outside as well, trying to figure out this kind of big kind of conspiracy against him. Overall, though, it's definitely my favorite episode of the season so far. I'm kind of, as much as I may find it similar to something in the before, I did enjoy it the most from all the 10, 11, and 12, and just the whole season. I think 11 was the one that most struck me. I like how it kind of reclaimed the relationship between Diane and BoJack. Everyone kind of, at the end of the season, everyone's arcs that were kind of created at the beginning are solved by the end. We have Todd and his kind of company thing with his sex robot, and that's kind of out of the way. Like I kind of predicted when I first saw the opening plot line of the season, I knew Princess Carolyn would have her kid, because she's one of the characters that I feel would need that kind of would deserve that kind of goodness. So I knew that the writers would probably go that way. When I think about what I expected from the show, everything kind of turned out the way I thought it would. And I remember in my first video, I remember saying that I wish that it would not, it would surprise me in some way. The most stylistically, different episode would be episode 6, which is the singular monologue, which, from in retrospect, I did like that they tried that, even though I don't think that it was kind of necessary, perhaps. But I did like that they did that. You know, not my favorite episode this season, but I know I'm 100% sure, I haven't looked it up yet, but I'm 100% sure everyone is fawning over it because it was well written, well performed. So yeah, I mean, overall the season I did enjoy, not as much as last season, and maybe not as much as the last 2 seasons. I'd have to rethink about the first few ones. I haven't really seen them in many years, but that's kind of my general thoughts on this new season of Bojack Horseman. Princess Carolyn's storyline, you know, I enjoyed. I'm looking back on it. I think right now, coming to this position where I can kind of look back on the season, I can think that overall, it was a positive experience for me. It was a couple of hours of watching. I could have probably finished. I'm reading Camus' The Stranger right now. I should have probably finished that instead. But I like kind of catching up with these characters. The idea. What I like about television is that you are introduced to some characters, and then you just kind of watch them develop over time, and you revisit them every year of some sorts, and you kind of see what they're up to. That's what the season really felt like for me. It didn't feel as monumental, as moving, or as I wasn't as invested with it, with the world of the show, with the characters, with the new characters as much as I was before. But it was nice knowing where they're going, because once you create something into the world, it kind of has a life of its own, and once you start investing your time into one thing, you kind of want to know what's going on with them, and in a way that they makes them kind of real to some degree, even though of course it's all fiction and it's all of that. This season deals a lot with more real life issues, perhaps more than the other seasons, particularly the whole Me Too movement and the voice of women, voice of feminism. Diane at the end of the season has this kind of line of sorts where she says in a very kind of pessimistic way, and maybe not pessimistic per se, but she says to Bojack, which seems like maybe they're saying it to the world, that no matter how much of your troubles will be taken apart by the media, taken apart by the world, you will not really be reclaimed on your own. You have to do it yourself. You have to change on your own, and you can't expect what other people say, or how other people treat you and how they punish you. You can't expect that to actually change you as a person. It's just it's only you can do that, and that's what the kind of the end of the show comes with. Bojack needs to finally kind of make that step to change for himself. And for me, I think it's kind of odd that it took this long for him to go to therapy. It took this long for him to go to rehab. But this is where we are right now, and I'm curious to see where it goes in the future. And maybe it is good that it wasn't as traumatic perhaps as the last few. Maybe this is Bojack's Horseman moving in a step more positively. Although it's a big scene where he kind of chokes his co-star, but honestly that's pretty much nothing compared to the things that have happened before. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the show. I like this season, and I'm looking forward to seeing more seasons in the future.